The backyard went completely silent when my father stepped through the gate holding a giant blue gift bag like he belonged there. For a second I honestly thought I was imagining him. Because people don't just disappear from your life for 15 years and suddenly show up smiling at your child's birthday party like nothing ever happened. But there he was. Standing beside the balloon arch my husband spent 2 hours setting up. Wearing that same fake calm expression I remembered from childhood. The same expression he used right before humiliating somebody. "Dad." I whispered before I could stop myself. My son Tyler looked up at me from the picnic table. "Mom? Who's that?" I couldn't answer him. My chest felt tight so fast it almost hurt to breathe. My husband Daniel immediately stepped closer to me. I felt his hand touch the middle of my back gently, steadying me. Then my father smiled like we were some happy family in a commercial. "There's my grandson," he said loudly. Not hello. Not after all these years. Not even my name. Just "there's my grandson." Tyler looked confused. He glanced at me again. "Mom." I swallowed hard. "You need to leave," I said quietly. A few guests stopped talking nearby. My cousin Rachel, who was helping set cupcakes on the table, froze the second she saw him. My father ignored me completely. "I brought him something special," he said, lifting the gift bag slightly. "Didn't think a grandfather should miss his grandson turning 7. Grandfather. The word made my stomach twist. Because this man hadn't cared whether I survived when I was 15 years old. And now suddenly he wanted to play grandpa? Daniel stepped forward carefully. "I think Samantha asked you to leave." My father looked Daniel up and down with this tiny smirk I hated. "You must be the husband," he said. "I've heard a lot about you." Daniel didn't even blink. "That makes one of us." A couple people awkwardly laughed before realizing nobody else was laughing. My father's eyes shifted back to me. "You really weren't going to invite your own family?" he asked. Family. That word almost made me angry enough to shake. I stared at him standing there in our backyard surrounded by Spider-Man decorations and little kids running around with juice boxes while my entire body remembered exactly what kind of man he really was. This was the same man who threw my clothes into garbage bags when I was 15. The same man who locked the front door behind me. The same man who told me if I walked away I better never come back asking for help. And now he was here pretending to be loving. Pretending to be hurt. Pretending to be the victim. "I think you should go," I said again, stronger this time. But instead of leaving he smiled. That smile scared me more than yelling ever did. Because it meant he thought he had control. Then he said the one sentence that made my blood run cold. "I think Tyler deserves to know why you disappeared from this family." I felt Daniel tense beside me instantly. Rachel dropped the stack of paper plates she was holding. And suddenly I wasn't 32 years old standing in my backyard anymore. I was 15 again. Standing in the rain outside my childhood home holding a trash bag full of clothes while my father stared at me through the screen door like I meant absolutely nothing. "My name is Samantha Carter. Most people call me Sam. I'm 32 years old and I work as a pediatric nurse outside Chicago. And until 2 months ago, I honestly believed I'd never see my father again. For most of my adult life I convinced myself I was okay with that. I told myself some people just don't get loving families. Some people survive them instead. But the truth is, there's a kind of pain that never fully leaves you when your own parent decides you're disposable. Especially when everybody around you acts like it was somehow your fault. Growing up, my younger sister Ashley was the family favorite. Everything Ashley did was amazing. Ashley's grades mattered more. Ashley's feelings mattered more. Ashley's future mattered more. And if I ever complained about the difference in treatment, my father would call me dramatic. Or selfish. Or difficult. By the time I was 14, I'd already learned the safest thing in our house was silence. But silence didn't save me anyway. When I was 15, my father found out I'd secretly applied for a summer arts program in another state. I loved drawing back then. It was the one thing that made me feel calm. The program offered scholarships and my art teacher encouraged me to apply. I didn't even think I'd get accepted. But I did. And when the acceptance letter came in the mail, my father lost his mind. Not because of the money. Not because of travel. Because I applied without asking permission. I still remember him standing in the kitchen holding the letter while Ashley sat at the counter pretending not to listen. "You think you're too good for this family now?" he asked. "I just wanted to try something," I said. "You don't make decisions without me. I wasn't trying to disrespect you. You already did." My mother stood near the sink the entire time without saying a word. That part hurt almost as much as what happened next. Because she saw everything. And she still stayed quiet. Things got worse after that. Every argument became about how ungrateful I was. How emotional I was. How exhausting I was. Until one night everything exploded. And 15 years later, somehow that same nightmare had followed me all the way to my son's birthday party. The night my father threw me out started over something unbelievably small. I came home 20 minutes late from my part-time job at a grocery store. That was it. 20 minutes. I still remember the digital clock on the microwave glowing 10:47 when I walked into the kitchen. My father was sitting at the table waiting for me. Not watching TV. Not reading. Just sitting there in silence with his arms crossed. And somehow that silence felt worse than yelling. "You think you can do whatever you want now?" he asked. I was exhausted from my shift. My feet hurt. I still smelled like freezer boxes and cardboard. "I called the house," I said carefully. Nobody answered. "You were told to be home at 10. I was closing the register. You should have left." I stared at him because I genuinely didn't know what answer he wanted anymore. Nothing was ever correct with him. If I worked, I wasn't home enough. If I stayed home, I was lazy. If I spoke up, I was disrespectful. If I stayed quiet, I was cold. It felt like losing before the argument even started. I said, "I'm sorry," I whispered. And then he stood up. Slowly. Dangerously calm. "You know what your problem is, Samantha?" he asked. "You think rules don't apply to you." "No, I don't." "Yes, you do." Ashley walked into the kitchen right then wearing one of my sweatshirts. But nobody ever asked before taking my things in that house. "What's going on?" she asked casually. Dad looked at her completely differently than he looked at me. Softer. Kinder. "Your sister thinks she can disrespect this family." Ashley crossed her arms immediately like she was already on his side before hearing anything. "Well, she kind of does whatever she wants." That hurt more than I expected. Because deep down I kept hoping one day Ashley would notice how unfair things were. But she liked being protected too much. "You know what?" I said finally. "I'm tired of acting like this family doesn't treat me differently." The room went dead quiet. My father stared at me like I'd just slapped him. "What did you say?" "You heard me." "No," he said. "Say it again." I should have stopped talking. I know that now. But after years of swallowing everything, something inside me finally snapped. "You act like Ashley can do no wrong," I said. "And everything I do is automatically bad." Ashley rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh my God. I work. I get good grades. I stay out of trouble. What exactly do you even want from me?" "I want respect," my father said sharply. "No," I said before I could stop myself. "You want control." The second those words left my mouth, I knew everything had changed. My father grabbed the acceptance letter from the counter, the one from the art program he'd kept for weeks like evidence in a trial, and threw it across the kitchen. "You think you're special?" he yelled. "I never said that." "You think the world owes you something?" "No. You're selfish, Samantha. Everything is always about what you want." My mother finally spoke from the hallway. "Please stop yelling." But she wasn't talking to him. She was talking to me. That was the moment something broke inside me permanently. Not because my father was cruel. I already knew he was. But because my mother watched it happen and still expected me to absorb it quietly to keep the peace. Then my father said the sentence I'll never forget for the rest of my life. "If you hate living here so much," he said, "then leave." I honestly thought he didn't mean it. I laughed nervously. But he walked straight to my bedroom. And started throwing my things into trash bags. At first I just stood there frozen. Ashley followed him upstairs watching the entire thing silently. My father ripped clothes off hangers. Dumped drawers into bags. Threw my sketchbooks onto the floor. "Dad, stop. You want freedom so badly?" he snapped. "Go be free." My mother stood in the hallway crying quietly. But she still didn't stop him. Not once. I remember grabbing one of my sketchbooks before it hit the trash bag because I loved those drawings more than almost anything. My father looked at me like I disgusted him. "You care more about those stupid pictures than your own family." "That's not true." "Then act like it." "I'm trying." "No," he said coldly. "You're rebelling." I wanted somebody to defend me. Anybody. My mother. Ashley. A neighbor. But nobody did. Around midnight, my father dragged the trash bags to the front door and opened it. Rain poured outside. Hard. Heavy enough to soak the porch instantly. Then he looked directly at me and said, "If you walk out that door, don't come back asking for help." I waited. I honestly waited for someone to stop this. For my mother to say this had gone too far. For Ashley to tell him to calm down. For somebody to remember I was 15 years old. Nobody moved. So eventually, I picked up the bags myself. And walked out. The sound of that front door locking behind me still lives in my head. Some nights I swear I can hear it even now. I spent the first 2 nights sleeping on my friend Nicole's couch pretending everything was temporary. But deep down I already knew the truth. My father wasn't teaching me a lesson. He was getting rid of me. And the worst part? After a few weeks, nobody came looking for me. Not even my mother. That realization changes you forever. Because once you understand your own family can continue life without you that easily, you stop expecting love to be unconditional from anyone. But what I didn't know back then was this. My father hadn't just thrown me out. He'd been quietly rewriting the story of what happened for years afterward. And 15 years later, that lie was about to explode in front of everybody. The hardest part about being abandoned by your family isn't the first night. It's the mornings after. It's waking up and realizing nobody called. Nobody texted. Nobody came looking. After about 2 weeks on Nicole's couch, I finally understood my father meant it. I wasn't coming home. Nicole's mom was kind enough to let me stay temporarily, but they already had 3 kids in a tiny apartment. I could feel myself becoming a burden no matter how polite they tried to be about it. So I learned how to survive fast. I picked up extra shifts at the grocery store. I started lying about my age to customers who asked why I looked so tired. I learned how to stretch $20 for an entire week. And eventually I stopped waiting for my mother to magically appear and apologize. That was probably the most painful part. Not my father. Her. Because cruelty from him felt predictable. Silence from her felt impossible to understand. By 17 I was balancing school during the day and working nights at a diner off Route 43. I barely slept. There were nights I cried in restaurant bathrooms from exhaustion before forcing myself back out with a fake smile for customers. But weirdly enough, those years also made me stronger. Not happier. Not healed. Just stronger. Because when nobody's coming to save you, you either collapse or adapt. And somewhere during all that chaos I stopped being afraid of hard things. That's also where I met Daniel. He used to come into the diner around midnight after his warehouse shifts. At first he barely talked. He'd order coffee, grilled cheese, and leave huge tips for no reason. One night he noticed I was limping. "You okay?" he asked. "Long shift. You've been working every night this week." I laughed tiredly. "You keeping track of me?" He shrugged. "Hard not to." That tiny conversation turned into longer ones. Then eventually rides home. Then eventually the first person in my life who made me feel safe instead of tolerated. I remember the first time he asked about my family. I lied immediately. "Oh, we're not really close." That sounded easier than the truth. Because how do you casually explain your father threw you away like garbage? But Daniel figured out pieces slowly. Mostly because of my reactions. I'd panic anytime somebody raised their voice. I apologized constantly for things that weren't my fault. I acted shocked every time somebody showed me basic kindness. One night after work he looked at me across the hood of his truck and said something that nearly broke me. "You know you don't have to earn being cared about, right?" I actually started crying. Right there in the parking lot. Because nobody had ever said something like that to me before. By 24 I finished nursing school. By 25, Daniel and I got married in a tiny courthouse ceremony with only 6 people there. No father walking me down the aisle. No mother helping me into a dress. No sister. And honestly, the empty seats hurt less than fake support would have. Then Tyler was born. And for the first time in my life, I understood what unconditional love was supposed to feel like. The second they placed that little boy in my arms, something inside me shifted permanently. Because I couldn't imagine looking at him someday and deciding he wasn't worth fighting for. I couldn't imagine locking him outside. I couldn't imagine letting pride matter more than my child. Becoming a mother made me realize how abnormal my childhood actually was. And for years after Tyler was born, things stayed quiet. No calls. No holidays. Nothing. Until 2 months ago. I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria during my lunch break when my phone buzzed with a Facebook notification. Ashley Carter sent you a message. Just seeing her name made my stomach tighten. I almost ignored it. I should have ignored it. But curiosity is dangerous when it comes to family. Her message was short. Hey, Dad's been asking about you. That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement. No how have you been after 15 years. Just Dad's been asking about you. I stared at the screen for almost 10 minutes before replying. What does he want? 3 dots appeared instantly. He wants to fix things. I actually laughed out loud sitting there alone with my cafeteria sandwich. Fix things. Like we were discussing a broken fence instead of years of emotional damage. I didn't answer for 2 days. Then Ashley sent another message. He's getting older, Sam. I hated how manipulative that sounded. Like time automatically erased what people did. Finally I replied, I'm not interested. Her answer came almost immediately. You really need to grow up eventually. That one made me angry. Not because it hurt. Because it sounded exactly like our father. Same tone. Same superiority. Same ability to rewrite reality until somehow I became the problem. A week later she called me while I was driving home from work. Against my better judgment I answered. Wow, Ashley said dramatically. You actually picked up. What do you want? She sighed heavily like I was already exhausting her. You know, Dad's trying. Trying what exactly? To reconnect. Why now? Silence. Then finally she said, things have been hard lately. There was. The real reason. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. What kind of hard? His business lost a major contract. I didn't say anything. Ashley continued carefully. And with Mom's medical bills. I almost missed my exit. Medical bills? My mother was sick? You didn't think to mention that first? I snapped. She didn't want you involved. That sentence hurt more than it should have. Even after all these years, part of me still wanted my mother to choose me. Ashley lowered her voice. Look, maybe we should just meet and talk. Every instinct told me no. But another part of me, the stupid hopeful part people never fully kill inside you, wondered if maybe closure was possible. Maybe answers were possible. Maybe even honesty. So against every warning sign screaming in my head, I agreed to lunch. And that decision ended up changing everything. I knew meeting Ashley was a mistake the second I walked into the restaurant. She was already sitting near the window wearing oversized sunglasses indoors like she was trying to look important. The second she saw me, her eyes scanned me from head to toe in this subtle judgmental way I remembered from childhood. Not even a hug. Not even a smile. Just, wow. You look tired. I almost turned around right then. But instead I sat down across from her and forced myself to stay calm. You too, I said. Ashley removed her sunglasses slowly. Still defensive, huh? And just like that we were kids again. Same games. Same little digs disguised as conversation. A waitress came over and Ashley ordered immediately without even looking at the menu. Of course she did. Ashley always acted comfortable everywhere because our father raised her believing the world would naturally make space for her. Meanwhile, I still apologized when people bumped into me. The waitress left and Ashley folded her hands dramatically. So, she said, how's your little family? Little family. Something about the way she said it irritated me instantly. They're good. I saw Tyler's pictures online. He's cute. I waited for something softer after that. Maybe an apology. Maybe regret. Instead she leaned back and said, Dad really wants to see him. I stared at her. Why? He's his grandfather. He's a stranger. Ashley rolled her eyes immediately. You always make everything sound so dramatic. Actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because hearing that word again after 15 years felt unbelievable. Dramatic. The label they used anytime I reacted normally to terrible treatment. He threw me out at 15, I said quietly. Ashley sighed loudly like she was exhausted already. You keep saying that like you were this innocent victim. The air around me suddenly felt heavier. I was 15. You were impossible to live with, Sam. I stared at her face trying to understand how two people could grow up in the same house and remember completely different childhoods. Then again, Ashley never experienced the version of our father I did. She experienced the charming version. The proud version. The version that showed up to school plays and bought birthday gifts and bragged about her accomplishments to neighbors. Meanwhile, I got the version that looked irritated every time I entered a room. "You have no idea what it was like for me," I said carefully. "Oh please," Ashley snapped. "Dad had rules. You hated rules. He threw a child out into the street. You left." That sentence hit me so hard I almost forgot where I was. Because that was the lie. The lie they told themselves so many times it became truth. I leaned forward slowly. "No," I said. "I was thrown out." Ashley crossed her arms. "You know what Dad says? He says you wanted attention all the time. He says nothing was ever enough for you." I felt my hands trembling under the table. Not because I doubted myself anymore. Because hearing his words come out of her mouth made me realize how deeply she'd absorbed him. Then Ashley said something that genuinely shocked me. "He cried after you left." I blinked at her. "What?" "He cried," she repeated. "You act like he never cared." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This is unbelievable." "No, what's unbelievable is how you've punished this family for years because you couldn't handle discipline. That did it." I pushed my chair back slightly. "I shouldn't have come." But Ashley leaned forward fast. "See? That's what you do. The second things get uncomfortable, you run." I froze. People at nearby tables were starting to glance over. Ashley noticed too. And somehow that only encouraged her. "You abandoned Mom when she got sick," she said loudly. My stomach dropped. "That's not true. You never called. I didn't even know she was sick until last week." Ashley shrugged dramatically. "Funny how you always have excuses." The couple at the next table openly stared now. Heat rushed into my face. That old humiliation from childhood started crawling back up my spine. The feeling of being publicly reduced into the family disappointment. I lowered my voice carefully. "Stop doing this." "Doing what?" "Telling the truth." "You know what the truth is?" I whispered. "You got treated better your entire life and you still needed somebody else to blame for everything." Ashley's face hardened instantly. "There it is," she said coldly. "Jealousy." I almost laughed again. Not because it was funny. Because it was hopeless. There was no conversation happening here. Ashley hadn't invited me to lunch for reconciliation. She invited me there to re-establish the family hierarchy. Me beneath her. Then she said the sentence that changed the entire direction of my thinking. "You know Dad's still paying for mistakes you made as a teenager?" I frowned. "What does that mean?" Ashley immediately looked uncomfortable. "Nothing." "No. What mistakes?" She grabbed her drink too quickly. "You know what? Forget it." A strange feeling settled into my chest right then. Because for the first time during that lunch, Ashley looked nervous. Not angry. Not smug. Nervous. I stared at her carefully. "What aren't you telling me?" "Nothing." "Ashley." She stood up suddenly and grabbed her purse. I knew this was pointless. I stood too. "What mistakes is he paying for?" People openly watched us now. Ashley looked around the restaurant before leaning toward me. And what she said next sent ice through my entire body. "You really don't know what Grandma left behind, do you?" Then she walked out. Just like that. Leaving me standing there confused, embarrassed, and completely blindsided. I sat back down slowly trying to process what had just happened. Grandma. My grandmother Evelyn died when I was 19. I hadn't been allowed at the funeral. Ashley had sent me a message afterward saying Dad thought my presence would create tension. At the time I was too hurt to fight about it. But now my chest felt tight for a completely different reason. Because suddenly pieces weren't fitting anymore. And for the first time in years I started wondering if my father's sudden interest in reconnecting had absolutely nothing to do with family at all. That night I barely slept. Ashley's words kept replaying in my head over and over. "You really don't know what Grandma left behind, do you?" At first I thought maybe she meant emotional baggage or family drama or some weird cryptic guilt trip. But deep down I knew it was something else. Something bigger. Daniel found me sitting at the kitchen table around 2 a.m. staring into a cold cup of coffee. "You've been out here an hour," he said softly. I rubbed my forehead. "Something's wrong." He sat beside me immediately. And that's one thing I'll always love about my husband. He never made me feel crazy for trusting my instincts. "What happened at lunch?" he asked. I told him everything. Every comment. Every insult. Every weird shift in Ashley's behavior. Daniel listened quietly without interrupting until I repeated the part about my grandmother. Then his expression changed slightly. You think there's money involved? I don't know. But you think something was hidden? I looked down at my hands. My grandmother loved me. That sentence alone almost made me emotional. Because my grandmother Evelyn was the only adult in my childhood who made me feel genuinely wanted. She used to sneak sketchbooks into my backpack when my father wasn't looking. He came to my art fair at school even when nobody else did. And right before I got thrown out, she told me something I never forgot. One day you're gonna realize surviving this family is proof you were never weak. After I left home, she still called secretly for a while. But those calls eventually stopped too. At 19, I got one short voicemail from Ashley saying Grandma had passed away peacefully. That was it. No details. No invitation. Nothing. At the time I believed my father simply hated me enough to erase me from another family event. But no. Now I wondered if there was more to the story. Daniel leaned back in his chair thoughtfully. You should talk to Rachel. I looked at him immediately. My cousin Rachel was older than me by 8 years. Growing up, she was basically treated like the black sheep of the extended family because she openly challenged my father sometimes. Which meant I secretly adored her. When I was little, she used to pull me aside during family holidays and whisper things like, "You're not crazy. They really do treat Ashley differently." Hearing that from someone else saved my sanity more times than she probably realized. But after I got kicked out, Rachel slowly disappeared from family gatherings too. I hadn't talked to her in almost 3 years. You think she knows something? I asked. Daniel shrugged. I think she's one of the few people in your family who ever told you the truth. So the next morning during my break at the hospital, I called her. Rachel answered on the second ring. Well, she said immediately, this can't be good. I actually laughed a little. Somehow her voice still felt safe after all these years. You busy tonight? I asked. 3 hours later, I was sitting across from her at a small Mexican restaurant near her apartment. Rachel looked almost exactly the same. Messy curls. Leather jacket. Tired eyes that always looked like they'd seen too much. The second I mentioned Ashley's comment about Grandma, Rachel stopped eating completely. And that silence told me everything. You know something, I said quietly. Rachel exhaled slowly. Yeah, she admitted. I felt my pulse speed up instantly. What? Rachel looked around the restaurant carefully before lowering her voice. Your grandmother left money for you. I froze. What? She created an education trust before she died. For a second, I genuinely couldn't process the words. Wait, what? Rachel nodded slowly. She was terrified you'd never get opportunities after your dad threw you out. I felt suddenly dizzy. How much money? I don't know exactly. But enough for college. Maybe more. I stared at her speechless. But I never got anything. Rachel gave me a look that made my stomach twist. That's because your father controlled the account. Every sound in the restaurant suddenly felt far away. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. What are you saying? Rachel hesitated. Then carefully said, I think the money disappeared. I leaned back slowly like the air had been punched out of me. No. Sam. No. That's impossible. But even while saying it, I knew it wasn't. Because suddenly everything started connecting. The sudden contact. Ashley's weird defensiveness. My father wanting reconciliation after 15 years. Rachel reached into her purse carefully. I debated whether to show you this. Then she handed me an old folded document. I opened it with shaking hands. It was a copy of part of my grandmother's estate paperwork. And there, in black and white, was my name. Samantha Carter. Beneficiary. I couldn't breathe for a second. She really did this? I whispered. Rachel nodded. She adored you. Tears burned my eyes immediately. Not because of the money. Because somebody in my family saw me. Even after everything. Rachel's expression softened. She used to fight with your dad constantly after you left. She blamed him for losing you. I looked down at the paperwork again. And he never told me. No, Rachel said quietly. He didn't. Anger started building slowly inside my chest. Not explosive anger. Something colder. Something steadier. 15 years. 15 years thinking nobody cared enough to help me. Meanwhile, my grandmother actually tried. What happened to the money? I asked. Rachel hesitated again. Then she said something that made my skin crawl. Ashley and your dad remodeled their lake house the same year the account closed. I stared at her. You think they stole it? Rachel looked uncomfortable. I think your father convinced himself he deserved it. I laughed bitterly under my breath. Of course he did. People like my father always believed they deserved everything. Even other people's futures. Then Rachel leaned closer. There's something else. The tone of her voice instantly made my stomach tighten again. What? Your father's business problems are worse than Ashley admitted. I frowned. How bad? He's drowning. For the first time all night I finally understood why he came back. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't love. It wasn't regret. It was desperation. And suddenly my son's birthday invitation posted online 2 weeks earlier didn't feel innocent anymore either. Because I had a horrible feeling my father wasn't planning to reconnect with me. I think he was planning to use me. For the next week I couldn't stop noticing things. Little things. The kind of details you normally ignore until suddenly your entire perspective changes. My father started liking old photos on my Facebook page at 3 a.m. Ashley viewed every Instagram story I posted within minutes. A woman I barely remembered from church 20 years ago suddenly messaged me saying, "Family is precious. Life's too short to hold grudges." That one almost made me throw my phone across the room. Because people always say things like that to the person who was hurt. Never the people who caused the damage. Meanwhile, Rachel kept digging quietly. And every new detail made me feel sicker. Apparently my father's business wasn't just struggling. It was collapsing. Loans. Debt. Possible lawsuits. According to Rachel, several relatives had already loaned him money recently after he promised he was rebuilding family relationships. That phrase stuck with me. Rebuilding family relationships. Like I was part of some image repair campaign. One night Daniel found me sitting on the couch rereading Grandma Evelyn's estate paperwork again. You okay? He asked softly. I shook my head. I don't know how to explain this. Try. I looked down at the papers. For years I told myself maybe Grandma stopped helping because she gave up on me too. Daniel immediately sat beside me. Sam. But she didn't, I whispered. She actually tried to protect me. My throat tightened hard after that. Because sometimes discovering somebody loved you hurts almost as much as discovering someone else didn't. Daniel wrapped an arm around my shoulders quietly. You know what I think? He said. What? I think your father underestimated the fact that you survived without him. I looked at him. He still thinks you're 15, Daniel continued. He thinks guilt makes you controllable. That sentence stayed in my head for days. Because Daniel was right. My father still saw me as the scared kid standing in the rain outside his house. But I wasn't her anymore. And the strange thing was, for the first time in years I stopped feeling afraid of him. Angry, yes. Hurt, absolutely. But not afraid. Then 3 days before Tyler's birthday party my mother called me. Not Ashley. Not some random relative. My mother. I almost didn't answer because seeing her name on my phone felt unreal. But eventually I picked up. Hello. Silence. Then a shaky breath. Sam. The sound of her voice nearly destroyed me instantly. Because no matter how old you get, part of you always stays a daughter. Hi, Mom. She started crying immediately. Not loud dramatic crying. Quiet crying. The kind people do when they've held things in too long. How are you? She whispered. I almost laughed from disbelief. How am I? After 15 years? But underneath the anger, I also heard something else in her voice. Fear. I'm okay, I said carefully. How's your health? Silence again. Then quietly, Ashley told you? She mentioned medical bills. My mother sighed softly. It's not as bad as they made it sound. That immediately raised alarms in my head. What does that mean? Another pause. Then she said something that changed everything. Your father's in trouble, Samantha. There was again. Not we. Not the family. Your father. I sat up straighter. What kind of trouble? He's made bad decisions. I waited. But years of living with my father had clearly trained her to speak in fragments instead of truths. Finally I asked, why is everyone contacting me now? My mother started crying harder. And then she whispered the sentence I never expected to hear from her. I should have stopped him. I closed my eyes instantly. 15 years. 15 years I waited to hear some version of that. You were a child, she whispered shakily. And I let him convince me you deserved it. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. Not because it fixed anything. Nothing could fix it. But because hearing the truth out loud after all those years felt overwhelming. I needed you, I whispered. I know. You never came after me. I know. I pressed my hand against my forehead, trying not to completely fall apart emotionally. Then my mother lowered her voice suddenly. Your father thinks reconnecting with you will help his reputation. Every muscle in my body went still. What? He's telling people he wants to repair the family before it's too late. I laughed bitterly. Convenient timing. But my mother wasn't done. There are rumors about the trust money. That sentence landed like ice water. He took it, didn't he? Silence. And silence was answer enough. I felt something inside me harden permanently right then. Not rage. Clarity. Pure clarity. Then my mother said quietly, he's planning to come to Tyler's birthday party. I stood up so fast my knee hit the coffee table. What? He saw the invitation pictures online. He wasn't invited. I know. Then why would he come? My mother hesitated. Because he thinks if people see him reconnecting publicly with you, it helps him. Of course it did. Everything with my father was performance. Image. Control. Perception. And suddenly I understood exactly what he was planning. He wanted witnesses. A public reconciliation. Photos. Proof that he was a loving father rebuilding broken relationships. And if I reacted emotionally, perfect, then he could paint me as unstable all over again. I felt strangely calm after that realization. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes right before something changes forever. Mom, I asked quietly, why are you telling me this now? She cried softly again. Because I don't want him hurting you anymore. I swallowed hard. Part of me wanted to ask where that protection was 15 years ago. But honestly, I was too tired. Instead I simply said, thank you for warning me. After we hung up, Daniel looked at me carefully from the kitchen doorway. He's coming, isn't he? I nodded slowly. Daniel's jaw tightened immediately. What do you want to do? I thought about my father smiling in public while lying privately. I thought about my grandmother trying to help me. I thought about 15 years of silence. And then I remembered something else. A voicemail. An old recording I kept buried in cloud storage because some part of me needed proof I hadn't imagined what happened. I looked up at Daniel slowly. And for the first time since all this started I smiled a little. Actually, I said quietly, I think I'm done letting him control the story.